The signal was first detected in 1953. Soviet specialists spent 8 years determining its source. In 1961, they established that the signal originated from Mount Elbrus, more precisely from inside the mountain, more precisely from a depth of approximately 4,200 meters, which places the source roughly 800 meters below sea level. Elbrus is a dormant volcano. Its magmatic chamber, by all available geological data, has been cold and empty since the Pleistocene epoch. The geological data was collected before the signal was found. Nobody had thought to measure the temperature. This is not the anomaly. The anomaly is that when the program installed instruments close enough to characterize the signal changed. It had been regular for the 8 years of initial detection. When the instruments reached it, it became irregular. The new irregularity had a specific rhythm. The rhythm was the tempo of human respiration at rest. I found this program through a geophysical research registry. I was systematizing for an institutional inventory of Soviet Earth science programs from the 1950s. The Elbrus-Radio program appeared as a cross-reference flag in the seismological database. A geophysical study of Elbrus classified at a level substantially above standard scientific research. The clearance request was processed and granted. The file was waiting. Nothing personal. A geophysics program with a military classification. Inconsistent classification levels are what archivists investigate. In those days, classified files like these were kept behind layers of secrecy. Every document was monitored, every researcher tracked. Today, NordVPN lets you encrypt your data and browse anonymously, keeping your research and identity protected from prying eyes. Check the link in the pinned comment for an exclusive deal. The Elbrus-Radio program was established in February 1961, when the source location of the signal was established with sufficient confidence to justify systematic study. Its founding documents describe an investigation into anomalous, low-frequency electromagnetic emissions from the Elbrus volcanic complex, with the stated scientific objective of characterizing the emission source and mechanism. The framing is geological and plausible. Dormant volcanic systems do produce electromagnetic signals, and unusual signals from the Elbrus system were not implausible as the residue of ancient volcanic activity. The program's scientific personnel were drawn from the Institute of Earth Physics in Moscow and from the Academy of Sciences Geophysical Division. The oversight, the entity responsible for the military classification, was a division the documents identify only by number. The signal had been detected since 1953, 8 years before the program was established. During those 8 years, it was monitored intermittently, characterized as an unidentified low-frequency anomaly in the Elbrus region, and flagged for further investigation that the standard scientific infrastructure was not equipped to conduct. The Elbrus-Radio program was the further investigation. The program's chief geophysicist was Dr. Alexei Kazantsev, 47 years old, recruited from the Institute of Volcanology in Petropavlovsk-Kamchatsky. He had spent 20 years studying signals from volcanic systems, which made him the appropriate scientific lead for a program nominally investigating volcanic electromagnetic emissions. He was also, as his field journals make clear, a man who had been studying volcanic signals long enough to know what they sounded like, and who understood within his first months on Elbrus that what he was studying did not sound like any volcanic signal he had encountered before. His field journal from September 1961, 6 months into the program, his first season on the mountain.
September 12th, 1961. We have established the primary monitoring station at 3,800 meters on the southern slope. The equipment is functioning within acceptable parameters. The signal is stronger here than at any previous location. It is also clearer. I have been listening to volcanic signals for 2 decades. This is not a volcanic signal. I do not know what it is.
He wrote in his assessment,
I want to document my current assessment of the signal's character, because I have now spent 6 months with it, and my assessment has changed since the program began. When I was recruited, I was told I would be characterizing anomalous electromagnetic emissions from a dormant volcanic system. I expected to find residual electromagnetic activity, the kind of low-level signal that persists in cooling geological systems as minerals with electromagnetic properties orient themselves in the residual thermal gradient. These signals exist. I have studied them on Kamchatka and in Iceland and in the Canary Islands. I know what they sound like. They are irregular in the specific way that natural processes are irregular. Variable in frequency, varying in intensity, following distributions that reflect the underlying geological conditions. What I'm hearing from Elbrus does not follow these distributions. The signal is not irregular in the way that natural processes are irregular. It is irregular in the way that a person is irregular. The kind of variation that has a center, a baseline, a return to normal after excursion. Natural signals do not have baselines they return to. They have states they persist in and transitions between states. What I'm hearing has a baseline. It varies around the baseline and returns to it. The baseline has a frequency of approximately 15 cycles per minute. 15 cycles per minute is the resting respiratory rate of a healthy adult human. I'm documenting this comparison without claiming that it is more than a comparison. It may be coincidence. It is a coincidence I cannot stop noticing.
A coincidence he could not stop noticing. He documented it in September 1961 and spent 9 more years trying to determine what the coincidence meant. By the end of those 9 years, he had a different word for it. The program spent its first 4 years in technical characterization, building the instrumentation required to study a signal at 4,200 meters depth, developing the analytical frameworks for interpreting low-frequency emissions from geological sources, mapping the signal's spatial distribution across the Elbrus system to identify its point of origin as precisely as the available technology allowed. The technical work produced a finding that the program's founding documents had not anticipated. The signal was not distributed across the volcanic complex. It was localized. It came from a specific point, approximately 340 meters in diameter, at the target depth. A sphere of anomalous emission in the center of a geological formation that should have contained nothing at that depth but cold rock. The sphere was warm. The program's thermal measurements, conducted through secondary means, borehole temperature logging, thermal gradient mapping at surface stations, established that the temperature at the source depth was 340 degrees above the expected value for cold, ancient rock at that position in the geological column. Not hot enough to indicate active magmatic activity. Hot enough to be wrong by any geological model the program's scientists could construct. Here's the first contradiction. The geological survey data for the Elbrus volcanic complex accumulated over decades of standard geological observation, published in the scientific literature, cited in the founding documents of the Elbrus-Radio program itself as the baseline against which anomalies would be measured, describes the magmatic chamber as inactive since the late Pleistocene, approximately 50,000 years ago. Cold rock, solidified magma, a dead system. But the signal suggested otherwise. The program's thermal measurements show a zone at 4,200 meters depth, 340 meters in diameter, at a temperature 340 degrees above the expected value for cold, ancient rock. The geological data says cold. The thermal data says warm. The geological data was established before anyone measured the temperature at depth in this specific zone. The program measured it. The geological literature and the program's internal measurements describe the same geological feature and produce incompatible pictures of its current thermal state. Either the geological literature is wrong about this particular zone, or something in the zone is producing heat that the geological models do not account for. In the program's 5th year, the signal changed. The change is documented in the radio exchange from October 16, 1966, between the program's field station on the mountain's northern slope and the Moscow relay station. The field team had been conducting continuous monitoring for 3 weeks, their first sustained period of around-the-clock observation, using instruments that were significantly more sensitive than the equipment available in the program's first 4 years. The exchange is in the program's communications log.
Field Elbrus to Moscow relay. We need to report a signal change. The signal has altered its character. Over. Moscow relay to Field Elbrus. Describe the change. Over. Field Elbrus. The signal was consistent in its rhythmic pattern for the entire period of this program and for the 8 years of prior detection. Approximately 15 cycles per minute with predictable variation. As of 47 minutes ago, the rhythm has changed. It is no longer consistent. The cycles are varying in a pattern that is not consistent with the prior behavior. Over. Moscow relay. Equipment check. When did you last calibrate? Over. Field Elbrus. All equipment checked and confirmed functioning correctly. This is not an equipment artifact. I want to note the specific character of the change because it is significant for the record. The new pattern is not random variation. It is irregular in a specific way. The baseline frequency has dropped to approximately 12 cycles per minute, with excursions up to 22. The range and the pattern of variation are consistent with, I'm going to say this exactly as I observe it, human respiratory variation during a period of increased attention. Resting breath is 15 cycles. Alert but calm attention produces the pattern we are now observing. The signal changed when we started continuous monitoring. The signal changed in a way that corresponds to a living organism that has noticed it is being observed. Over. Moscow relay. Confirm that you are describing an electromagnetic geological signal. Over. Field Elbrus. I am describing the signal we have been monitoring for 5 years from a depth of 4,200 meters in a dormant volcanic system. I'm describing a change in that signal that occurred 47 minutes after we began continuous monitoring. I'm describing the character of the change as accurately as I can. I'm not able to add an interpretation to this description that I'm able to support with the data available to me. Over. Moscow relay. Understood. Continue monitoring. File full report by 1800. Over.
The signal changed when we started continuous monitoring. The field team said it plainly, in the flat professional language of people who had been studying a geological signal for 5 years and were now watching it respond to being watched. They described it as accurately as they could and declined to add an interpretation they could not support with data. The interpretation came 3 years later. Before it arrived, Kazantsev's field journal from December 1966, 2 months after the signal changed, documents the interval between observation and understanding with the particular quality of a scientist who has seen something he cannot categorize and has decided to keep watching.
2 months since the change. The new pattern has stabilized. It is not the same as the pre-change pattern. The baseline has settled at 12 cycles per minute. The excursions reach a maximum of 22. The distribution of variation is consistent and reproducible. I have spent 2 months trying to determine whether this pattern could have been produced by any physical process I can identify. I have tested thermal cycling, electromagnetic interference from our own instruments, seasonal atmospheric effects, seismic microactivity in the volcanic complex. None of these explain a sustained shift to a specific rhythmic pattern that is itself consistent with a biological process. I want to write something that I have been reluctant to write, because writing it puts it in the record, and the record persists. What I'm observing is consistent with a signal source that registered a change in its environment and altered its output in response. Not a physical change. The physical environment of the signal source has not changed. A change in attention. We began continuous monitoring. The signal changed. The signal changed in the specific way that an organism changes when it notices it has been noticed. I have spent 23 years studying volcanic systems. I have never attributed an intention to a geological formation. I am not certain I am attributing an intention now. I am documenting an observation. The signal behaves as though it noticed. I am going to keep watching and see what it does next.
He kept watching for 7 more years. The signal kept responding. Now, I need to tell you what the program understood. I thought the Elbrus-Radio program had found an unusual geological signal. Anomalous, certainly, worth studying, but ultimately a physical phenomenon in a physical system that had been active longer than anyone had realized. The temperature anomaly, the localization, the frequency coincidence with human respiration, all of these could be accommodated, I assumed, within the framework of an incompletely understood geological system. Unusual, not inexplicable. I was wrong about inexplicable. The signal is inexplicable by geology. It was inexplicable when the program found it, and it remained inexplicable throughout the program's documented operation, and, as the final entry in the scientific registry suggests, it remains inexplicable now. What it is not is unintelligible. The linguist who analyzed the signal's structure was Dr. Valentina Yefimova, 52 years old, from the Institute of Linguistics in Moscow. She was brought into the program in its 7th year, after the signal's response to continuous monitoring had been documented and the change in its rhythmic pattern had been sustained for 3 years. Her mandate was to determine whether the signal contained any structure consistent with language or organized communication. Her analysis runs to 58 pages. Its central finding is stated with the precision of a specialist who has spent 30 years studying how structured information is organized in human languages, and who has now encountered something that organizes information in the same way. Yefimova's final report contains a section that reads less like scientific documentation and more like a confession of uncertainty.
I want to document the results of my frequency analysis with care because the conclusion it supports is one that I am certain will require multiple independent verifications before it can be considered established. I have applied the standard methods for identifying linguistic structure in unknown signal types, distribution analysis following Zipf's law, entropy measurement, autocorrelation at multiple timescales, and pattern recognition methods developed for the analysis of undeciphered ancient scripts. The signal exhibits Zipf distribution. This is significant. Zipf's law, the specific power law relationship between signal element frequency and rank, is one of the most reliable indicators of linguistic organization. It appears in every human language that has been analyzed, in every script, in every form of organized symbolic communication that has been studied. It does not appear in natural physical phenomena at the level observed in this signal. The probability of a geological signal exhibiting Zipf distribution of this magnitude by chance is, in my calculation, sufficiently small that I am treating it as effectively zero. The signal contains organized structure consistent with language. I cannot decode it. I cannot identify the units that function as symbols. I cannot establish the grammar or the semantic content. What I can establish with confidence is that the organizational principle underlying the signal is the same organizational principle that underlies every language I have studied in 30 years of practice. Something organized this signal. Something that organizes information the way language organizes information. The geological record indicates that this signal has been present in the Elbrus system for at minimum several thousand years, and the evidence suggests substantially longer. I am filing this as a finding. I do not have a framework for what the finding implies.
Something that organizes information the way language organizes information. The appendix to Yefimova's report contains one close analysis, a single 40-second segment of the signal from 1968, processed with the highest available resolution, that she describes as the clearest example of the organizational structure. She does not claim to have decoded it. She describes what the analysis shows. Within the 40-second segment, there are approximately 11 distinct recurring elements, each appearing at a frequency consistent with the Zipf distribution, with the most common element appearing 7 times and the least common appearing once. The elements are not random sequences of signal values. They have internal structure, a consistent shape that distinguishes them from each other and from background noise. They are, in her analysis, the equivalent of words, the building blocks of a structured communication, whose grammar and vocabulary remain entirely opaque, but whose existence as structured communication is, she argues, as well supported as any conclusion she has produced in 30 years of linguistics. She spent 6 months on the 40-second segment. She found 11 words. She does not know what any of them mean. She knows they are words. Something in the rock of Elbrus, at a depth of 4,200 meters, in a zone of anomalous warmth, that has been transmitting a Zipf-distributed signal for longer than any human civilization has been able to receive it. And that adjusted its transmission pattern when the first sustained period of human reception began. Here's the second contradiction. The program's 1953 detection record, the first documented observation of the Elbrus signal, 8 years before the program's establishment, describes the signal as unstructured, irregular, consistent with natural geological noise elevated above background by an unknown mechanism. The 1953 assessment, reached by experienced geophysicists using the instruments available at the time, was low-frequency anomaly, uncharacterized, origin unknown. No linguistic structure detected or suspected. The program's 1969 analysis, Yefimova's analysis, using methods that did not exist in 1953, finds zip distribution consistent with linguistic organization. The same signal, analyzed with different tools 16 years apart, described as unstructured noise in 1953 and as organized linguistic structure in 1969. Two characterizations of the same signal, separated by 16 years of analytical development, producing incompatible descriptions of what the signal contains. The 1953 characterization was not wrong with the tools available. The 1969 characterization required tools that 1953 did not possess. The signal was organized all along. The organization was not visible until the instruments were adequate to find it. The signal had been waiting for the instruments, or the instruments had finally caught up with the signal. The distinction, in the context of what the signal did when sustained monitoring began, is not entirely academic. Here is the third contradiction: the document that should not exist. The program's operational journal, the master log recording all significant events, decisions, and findings across the program's lifespan, contains entries through June 7, 1973. The last entry on that date is signed by the program director, Dr. Kazantsev, now 59 years old, 12 years into the program. The entry is a standard operational status report. Signal parameters unchanged, monitoring continuing. Nothing to note beyond routine data accumulation. The next entry in the same journal, on the same page, dated the same day, is in different handwriting.
Program continues under new administrative structure. Monitoring mandate extended indefinitely. Operational continuity confirmed. No interruption in data collection. Personnel transition effective immediately. The scientific record accumulated under the previous directorship is retained in full. The program's findings regarding signal structure, thermal anomaly, and response to sustained monitoring are acknowledged and incorporated into the new operational framework. The monitoring mandate is extended on the basis that the program's central question, the nature, origin, and content of the signal, remains unanswered. The program continues because the signal continues. The signal has not signed off. Neither will we.
Kazantsev signed the last entry of his tenure. An unknown hand signed the next entry in the same journal on the same day. Kazantsev signed the last entry of his tenure. An unknown hand signed the next entry on the same day, in the same journal. The program did not close. The program changed hands. There is no record in the accessible file of what occasioned the administrative transition. No memo, no directive, no explanation for why a program that had been operating for 12 years with consistent personnel would transition its leadership on a specific Tuesday in June 1973. Kazantsev's subsequent career, I looked him up, shows him returning to the Institute of Volcanology in Moscow, publishing papers on Kamchatka, never again referencing work on the Caucasus. He lived until 1991. He published 47 papers after 1973. None of them mention Elbrus. The scientific registry that led me to this file, the registry I was systematizing for the geophysical inventory, contains records for the Elbrus-Radio program through 1973, consistent with the classified file. And then, 40 pages later in the same registry, filed between entries from 2001 and 2005, a routine equipment status report for the Elbrus Geophysical Monitoring Station, dated March 2003. Standard language, equipment functioning within operational parameters, data transmitted to archive for the preceding 12 months, station operating normally. Signed by a duty operator. Not the 1970s, 2003. A routine status report, filed in the same registry as the classified program, for a station that is still operating. I searched for the station. It exists. The Elbrus Geophysical Monitoring Station, established, according to its institutional registration, in 1974. 1 year after the administrative transition in the Elbrus-Radio program. Operating continuously since 1974. Staffed by geophysicists whose published work covers seismological monitoring, electromagnetic anomaly detection, and low-frequency signal analysis. The station's institutional affiliation is listed as the Russian Academy of Sciences Geophysical Division. Its equipment manifest, visible in a public procurement database, includes instruments with specifications consistent with the monitoring requirements established by the Elbrus-Radio program in the early 1960s. The program did not close. The program became a station that has been operating for 50 years, publishing seismological research, filing routine status reports, and continuing to monitor a signal from 4,200 meters beneath the surface of a dormant volcano that has a zip distributed transmission pattern and adjusts its rhythm when sustained monitoring begins. The station's publication page shows 14 papers published in the past 3 years. The most recent, listed at the top, was published 2 days ago. Its title, Anomalous Low-Frequency Signals in the Greater Caucasus Region, New Data. I have not read the paper. I have the title and the author's names and the journal citation available from the station's public website. I do not need to read it to know what category of signal the paper's title is describing. The program found it in 1953. The program characterized it across 20 years of careful work. The program became a station. The station has been publishing papers for 50 years about anomalous low-frequency signals in the Greater Caucasus region. The most recent paper was published 2 days ago. The people publishing the paper may know what they are sitting on top of. They may not. The station's public materials contain nothing about classified programs, nothing about the Elbrus-Radio file, nothing about zip distributions in geological signals or signal responses to sustained monitoring. They describe standard geophysical research, seismic monitoring, electromagnetic anomaly detection, the ordinary science of listening to what the Earth produces. If the people currently working at the station know what the signal means, what it contains, why it changed in October 1966, what 11 words of unknown vocabulary Yefimova found in 40 seconds of it, that knowledge is not in the public record. It may be in a classified file at a classification level I have not reached. It may be in the successor file to the one I am holding. It may be nowhere, if the institutional memory did not survive the administrative transitions of 1973 and the subsequent decades. The signal may be the only record of itself that persists, speaking in a language no one has decoded, to instruments that have been running continuously since before the researchers who installed them were born. I have spent 3 weeks with the file. I know what the anomalous low-frequency signal in the Greater Caucasus region is, and approximately what new data would look like. The signal was transmitting before any human civilization existed that could have built a receiver. It was transmitting in 1953 when the first instruments detected it. It changed when sustained monitoring began, in a way consistent with a living system that has noticed attention. It has been transmitting with the organizational structure of language continuously since the monitoring station was established in 1974. And someone has been there the entire time, listening, filing routine status reports, publishing papers, and apparently producing new data about a signal that has been producing data for longer than the program that found it has been in existence. The signal has not signed off. It is still transmitting, and the people who are still listening are still taking notes. I am going to close this file. I am going to note the cross-reference in the seismological database as reviewed and reconciled. I am going to file the clearance request log and mark the inventory entry as complete. I am not going to download the paper published 2 days ago. I have made the decision not to, and I want to be precise about why. Not because I'm afraid of what it contains, but because there is a specific kind of attention that a file like this one asks for, and I have given it 3 weeks of that attention. There is a difference between reading a classified archive and entering an active inquiry. I am an archivist. The active inquiry is someone else's work. But I know the signal is still there. I know it has been there since before the instruments existed to hear it. I know it changed when the instruments arrived and sustained listening began. And I know that somewhere, in a monitoring station on the northern slope of a dormant volcano, the instruments are still running, and the data is still accumulating. And whatever is at 4,200 meters depth has been speaking, in the organized rhythm of something that knows how to organize information for longer than any record exists of anything on this planet that knows how to listen. It has not signed off. It is waiting to be understood.